He's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with over 27 years of experience.
And he's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief. And together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about advertising, creative briefs, and briefing. Well, Howard, we're back. And today I thought we'd go back into my personal archives and share a brief that I wrote at an agency I will not name for a pitch we did not win. But since we always lament the fact that there are very few completed briefs out there in the internets, right? I thought that we can share this one and kind of critique it. We could look at it. I could kind of walk you through my thinking as I remember it, and then, you know, just have a conversation about it. See what we can.
Love this. I love this. It's the real thing. And there aren't, like you said, there really aren't that many out there, although we're going to have an announcement in a couple of weeks about something that I'm going to be introducing to the world.
Oh, Howard, you're such a tease.
I know I've talked about it before, but you know, I'm not going to say it. A lot of people already know about it, but anyway, let's talk about this brief. Tell us about the brief, Henry.
All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a very quick screen share here, and I will share the brief, which has been sanitized to protect the innocent. And and so like as I mentioned, this brief came to us, or actually was written for an RFP that came to us for an airline, and that airline is Delta. As I mentioned, we did not win the business. I don't even remember what happened with the RFP. Sometimes clients pull the plug on an RFP. I've had that happen before, where in the middle of the RFP, they decide we're not going to hire an agency, whatever. I don't remember.
But notice the date here. This is in 2014 when Henry was in his 30s or something like that.
Yeah. So this is for Delta. And so one of the things that's unique about an RFP situation is that usually the client briefing is pretty detailed. Like what they are expecting for the assignment is pretty narrow. And that was the case here. They basically gave us, like, you know, there's business travel, there's family travel, there's different levels of class of service in the airline. So they kind of pre-masticated for us like what they wanted us to focus on, what they wanted us to create a campaign for. So here in the brief, you see we have an objective section, which is basically saying like, hey, what the hell are we doing? Develop a multimedia brand campaign for Delta Airlines that will bring their global brand positioning to life for U.S. Hispanic travelers who go to Latin America to visit friends and relatives. So that's already starting to put a focus on what we're going to do, right? There's
Can I make a comment about this as we go along? Do we want to wait to the end?
Absolutely.
Okay. Here is where I would say, as a creative, I would want a little bit more focus, because to develop the media campaign is kind of, that's the assignment, but what's the objective of the assignment? And here's where I say a really judicious verb. You've heard me talk about this before. A good verb is going to help me crystallize in my head what it is that we're doing. So in other words, are we trying to persuade someone? Are we trying to excite someone? Are we trying to romance someone? Are we trying to seduce someone to do this? I think there's opportunity here to pick a really good verb to talk about what these Hispanics are going to be doing to visit family and friends. I mean, it's clear what you're asking us to do, but I would want to see a little bit more focus on that and pick a good verb.
It's a fair point, and I will.
But you're only in your 30s when you wrote. You're only in your 30s when you wrote this, or maybe you're in your 20s. I don't know. Maybe it's in your teens. I forget what.
But we're not. But in my defense, I think what I'm setting up here is, hey, there's this Delta brand campaign and positioning that exists.
Right.
We need to bring it to life for Hispanic consumers. And later on in the brief, there's a shift to from section, which I think gets to what you're asking about. Like what that verb is like what we're asking them to reconsider the way that they think about booking air travel, but we'll get there in a second.
Yeah.
So the target, and admittedly in an RFP process, you don't get a lot of I'm working on regular clients every day. This is like stuff thrown on top of the regular work that we're already doing. So maybe this target description, looking back at this brief, this is probably where the brief is kind of weakest, is in this target description. But here's what I wrote. These Hispanics are mainly immigrants who travel regularly or semi-regularly to their home countries. We're focusing on Hispanics in New York and LA. Their destinations include Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, right? So we're kind of saying for LA, it's these 3 countries. For New York, it's these 2 countries or territories, right? They're price sensitive, as this is elective travel. And the important part is being there, not how they get there. So they're always looking for the cheapest way to get there. And in many cases, they travel with checked baggage filled with gifts and items that have been requested by the family. I'm adding a little bit of texture here.
And this is where I think, I mean, it's like the description gets better as we go on. That's really interesting tidbit of stuff. So I like that a lot.
So I wanted to get the people in the mindset. Like my wife is an Ecuadorian immigrant, right? So when she travels to Ecuador, her friends say, can you bring me X, Y, and Z from the States, things that they can't get over there? Or you want to take a gift to somebody that you haven't seen in a long time, right? And my wife's case is actually not that bad, because it's actually hers is different now because we just built a house in Ecuador. So she's been lugging like stuff for the new house that she's bought at Home Depot and a Target or whatever, and taking it over there. But this idea of traveling with stuff is important. Often they plan these trips far in advance. Holidays, birthdays, weddings are important milestones, are occasions that can trigger such travel. And missing such events or missing work upon return because of airline delays or cancellation is the worst possible outcome, right?
And
And
you
the
know
reason,
what? I think that line is incredibly revealing. And I mean, that's kind of getting into a mindset that's going to affect how the creators might think about talking to this audience. That's really good.
and it's also setting up part of Delta's claim and positioning,
Promise, yeah.
which we're going to see, which is, you know, their on time record. So we're kind of already starting to set it up, the joke, right, for what eventually is going to be the punchline.
Right. And just to say, because, you know, we're looking at a brief that you wrote almost 10 years ago, and you could have hinted possibly that in writing your objective, because that's a powerful promise, I think, from Delta.
Yeah. So then here's that shift, you know, what is the target thinking now and how do we want them to think? And I like this shift, and the reason I like it is because it's reasonable. It's not saying that we're going to change the world for Delta. It's a little shift that we want to make in the consumer's thinking. And what do they currently think? I'd like to travel to my country. Let's see which airline is going to be the cheapest for this trip. Probably one of the usual suspects like American, right? American has the most routes, the most nonstops, all of that to Latin America. But Delta's telling us we want to grow our Latin America business. So what is the shift? Like ideally for Delta, how does Delta win after being exposed to this communication? It says, you know what? I'd like to travel to my country. Can I take Delta on this trip? Like start to think about Delta as, if I can take Delta, I'm definitely going to do that. Like if it's within striking distance of the price of American, that's going to be my preferred airline.
And what I like about this shift idea, as you said, it's based on something realistic, and it's not a world-changing thing. It's something that's believable. When I do my training, I like to emphasize this kind of a shift in a brief. But the tendency, I think, among some clients or marketers is to believe that my product or service is going to change the world. And it becomes wishful thinking. And this becomes then an example of marketers talking to themselves and not really to customers. So that is believable. That's what makes this, I think, really good.
So the insight here is passengers are hungry for advocates that will remove obstacles and put their needs and desires first, right? So we've all you just had a series of delays in air travel. And you know, sometimes it's not the airline's fault, but how they communicate, if they don't communicate it well, that is their fault, right?
Yep.
what are they doing to alleviate the situation, and so forth. So the idea that passengers are hungry for advocates, and now we're starting to set up what Delta's kind of promise is.
It's
Now, again,
interesting that you point this out almost 10 years ago, when it's even more so the case today.
correct. And so the unique selling proposition, the single-minded proposition, the one thing to communicate, whatever we want to call it, and this is largely going to come from what they gave us, right? Because this is an RFP, and a lot of it is, as I mentioned, chewed up, but it's Delta is the world's most trusted airline because of what we're willing to take on to benefit our flyers, right? So it's basically saying we're willing to take stuff on for you to benefit you, to be that advocate that we kind of talked about in the insight. So the support for the here's kind of like the body copy, right? The support for the promise. 165 million passengers last year, more than any airline. A lot of consumers might not know that, like, an 85-year history. These are things that, some Hispanic consumers might not be aware of, like the history of Delta Airlines. A best on-time record of any US airline. Again, maybe in retrospect, I could have put that one first. Best completion percentage of any US airlines. Fewer cancellations. So 99.7% of their flights are not canceled. A lot of times airlines, if they see it's half booked, they'll cancel it, even though there's nothing wrong with the plane, because they can bump the passengers to the next flight that's also 50% booked and just inconvenience you. Innovative products such as best in class. This is stuff that they gave us that they're telling us that they want to promote, award-winning service. Over the last 12 to 24 months, Delta's made significant investments in products and services for passengers traveling between Latin America and the US, including regionally inspired foods, onboard luggage support, airport signage, expanded schedules, and competitive fares and baggage policy. So all of this stuff that they're doing to get more Latin America business, we want to put it out there because it's attractive to consumers, like having expanded schedules and changing the fare structure is so. What the tone? Probably I got too much on here. I'm looking back at it. I think nowadays I'd be a lot more economical, but they're saying swaggeringly confident wingman was their tone. I think I could have probably left it at that. But they also gave us like some guidance. We don't sound like a corporation. We want to sound like a person. Speaks as an ally. Again, that idea of advocate. Bold but not pushy, and takes credit for the hard work Delta has done, right? So swaggeringly confident.
Well, as a creative, these ideas or these tone suggestions, I think, are really helpful. They put a clear vision in my head of where I could possibly go. They're not solutions, they're direction, but they give me some energy. And like I said, they give me a direction. When a creative says I can work with that, that means the brief is pretty good. So now maybe you might have called these, you might have stuck with swaggeringly confident wingman as the tone and used some of these as creative thought starters. I've seen briefs that offer that, and I think those are welcome. I've never had a problem with that. It's not the brief writer trying to solve the problem. It's just like, hey, here's some directions you might want to consider. Creatives will often just say, yeah, forget it. And then they'll go back to the office with their partner and say, hey, actually, that was a pretty good idea. Let's see what we can go with that. They won't tell us the brief writer that.
Yeah. And then we have here the mandatories, their tagline, the client's preference for the style of photography. And this stuff, it would be a mistake in a pitch not to do this because they told us this is what we want, right? It's not the time to say, you know what, we have a better way of doing this. They already have a general market agency that they paid millions of dollars to develop this stuff. So knowing your lane, right? If we were a general market agency and Delta was coming to us because they needed to be repositioned, that's a wide open new thing, and you wouldn't see this closed-end mandatories like we have here. But it's important for the creatives to know that there are closed-end mandatories that we must abide by.
Just out of curiosity, because I don't know the answer to this, is the Delta tagline still keep climbing? You know,
Unclear. I didn't look it up in preparation for the.
neither did I. And I'm going to bet you $10 that it's not. Because how easily companies dump the equity they've built up into a really good tagline and keep climbing. Is, I don't know, it sounds pretty good to me. But you and I can both name examples of great taglines or great, which I call promises. Taglines are basically a brand's promise that have been discarded because they're no longer new and shiny. You know, we've said this many times before, customers or clients tire of some of their lines long before customers even know they exist.
Yeah, I agree. So, and then, we have, in this brief, we have the deliverables that we're asking for. Again, it's a pitch. Probably they told us that, like, show us X amount of creative, right? Like
Mhm.
we're not going off and creating a website for this pitch where they want to see a TV, they want to see print, one that's focusing on that LA market and those destinations, one that's focusing on the New York market and those destinations, radios, same thing, digital banners, same thing. I think nowadays we would probably get social media posts,
Right.
and those types of things in there. But this is the brief. I mean, I think it's a solid brief.
I
Uh,
agree.
I think it's on 2 pages, could be shorter, I guess. But there's a lot of mandatories and a lot of explanation that needs to be done, given the fact it's not a client that we work with, and that I need to articulate things that the creatives aren't going to know in advance.
Well, as you said, this is a slightly different setup than a typical, a brief that you do for an existing client. This is a pitch. So the criteria are different, but I think this brief contains the elements that I think any creative could work with. It would promote a good conversation in the kickoff, and I'd say well done. Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.